In September of 2002, thousands of faithful crowded the streets of Winnipeg in the Canadian province of Manitoba. A swarming procession escorted the body of a martyr to St. Joseph's Ukrainian Catholic Church, culminating in a celebration of the Divine Liturgy and open veneration of the man's holy relics. Who was this man who attracted national media attention almost 30 years after his death? What led the church to build a pilgrim shrine housing his relics, and even a museum dedicated to his life? His name is Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky, a native son of Ukraine. How did Blessed Vasyl serve as a beacon of holiness to his fellow Ukrainians? What horrible persecution led Pope John Paul II to declare him a martyr of the Church? How did he come to rest in Winnipeg? And what can we learn from his life? In the next half hour, we will discover the answers to these questions. Vasyl Velychkovsky entered the world on June 1, 1903, in Stanislavyu, Ukraine. Young Vasyl's exposure to priestly life began at birth. His father and both of his grandfathers were themselves Ukrainian Catholic priests. In 1911, 7-year-old Vasyl accompanied his mother to his grandfather's parish, where the boy was dedicated to the Holy Mother of God. The martyr would later describe this day as a pivotal moment in his life. Following in his family's tradition, Blessed Vasyl took his Redemptorist vows in 1925 and was soon thereafter ordained a Ukrainian Rite priest. After a year of teaching in the Juvenate near Lviv, Father Vasyl was transferred to Stanislavyu, where he gave missions to neighboring parishes. From 1928 to 1935, Father Vasyl worked in the district of Volyn, giving missions among the Orthodox before returning to his mission in Stanislavyu. In 1940, Ukraine found itself under the communist thumb of the Soviet Union. The Soviets outlawed the Ukrainian Catholic Church in 1946, and its faithful were forced underground to worship in secret.
Communism is a government of control. They wanted to control all people, give them all directions, dictate to them what's right and wrong. Christianity comes along and emphasizes the dignity of each person and a certain freedom in Christ, and that freedom they were afraid of. Especially Christians, they so often were not afraid of them because of their faith, and that they couldn't handle.
For 3 decades, Vasyl Velychkovsky would practice his faith in defiance of the Soviets and would pay the ultimate price for doing so. In 1940, Father Vasyl led a procession through the streets of Stanislavyu on the feast of Our Mother of Perpetual Help, incurring the wrath of the communist authorities, who subsequently arrested the priest. However, because Father Vasyl's popularity was so overwhelming, the authorities feared that his imprisonment might cause an uproar.
Russians, especially KGB, was very afraid of that when people go against their will, you know. That was after that demonstration, that was a lot of arresting around, you know, a lot of arresting around.
He was released only a day or so later, but not before being interrogated and beaten. In April of 1944, the Soviets were in the midst of recapturing Ukraine, and they had the city of Ternopil in their sights. Father Vasyl volunteered to go to the war-torn city. Although the Russian army had not yet arrived, Ternopil was a constant target of Soviet artillery shells. Here, against this perilous backdrop, Father Vasyl continued his ministry.
It was a time of persecution. Often the police would call him out for interrogation. We needed to go to confession often during the week. I knew they were calling the bishop often for interrogation, but I needed to go. So I went, and the bishop never said, You know, maybe let's be more cautious because it's dangerous. Never.
Very quickly after the communists took over Ukraine, they liquidated the church and said that this church in 1946 is an illegal body. You cannot belong to it. It doesn't exist. You cannot gather in its name. You can't profess being a Ukrainian Catholic. It doesn't exist.
On July 26, 1945, the secret police found and arrested him.
Really, he was in the garden when they come in to arrest him, praying the rosary, walking and praying the rosary. And then something pushes him, and he walks to the house, and he says, "I'm ready." He gives his hands, "I'm ready."
They arrested all the bishops, 11 of them, of the church, and about 1,700 priests were arrested in that same summer. Among them was Blessed Vasyl.
The Soviets gave Father Vasyl an opportunity for freedom. He had simply to renounce his beliefs and turn his back on Ukrainian Catholicism. But despite continued beatings and the looming threat of punishments far worse, Father Vasyl Velychkovsky remained steadfast in his faith.
They beat him and stuff like that, to make him, to scare him. And he said to them, "You can do anything to my body, but you never will have my soul."
Unable to bully Father Vasyl into submission, the communists convicted him of the crime of anti-Soviet propaganda and sentenced him to prison in Kyiv. Here, for another year, the brutal interrogations continued.
It is difficult to understand in terms of human rights why Soviet did this, knowing that internationally this was a wrong thing to do.
Finally, he was sentenced to death by firing squad. Father Vasyl spent the next 3 months on death row, where he continued to reach out and minister to those around him.
Then he began to preach to them a retreat lasting 10 days. He finished it by confessing all the prisoners and gave them Holy Communion. During those 10 days, no one was called to the firing squad. That was a miracle.
The day finally came when they called the name Vasyl Velychkovsky. Was this the end? Not by any means. As Father Vasyl would find out, death was not as imminent as he'd been led to believe.
While awaiting for his execution, he was notified that his death sentence was changed to 10 years imprisonment in a concentration camp in Vorkuta, which again was one of the most severe and most vicious concentration camp in the Soviet Union.
Although it was very dangerous, he used to confess us down in the shaft. Many of us would go to confession. His confessions were so profound. We received such peace from him.
Following the death of Stalin in March of 1953, an outbreak of prison strikes prompted the authorities to suspect Father Vasyl of inciting unrest among his fellow workers. They sent him to a prison in Vladimir, near Moscow. Father Vasyl appealed his case before the Supreme Soviet, who found him innocent and sent him back to Vorkuta. After serving out the remainder of his sentence there, Father Vasyl was released in 1955. He moved to Lviv, where he promptly resumed his work in the underground church. His decade in prison left him scarred yet unafraid, and he continued undaunted in his defiance of the Soviets. He was named bishop in 1959, but with no one to perform his consecration, he remained a bishop-elect. Metropolitan Joseph Slipe, under whose jurisdiction Lviv fell, was himself a prisoner of the Soviets. But through the combined efforts of Pope John XXIII and President Kennedy, Metropolitan Joseph was released from prison in 1963 and sent word to Blessed Vasyl to come quickly to Moscow. In a plain Moscow hotel room, the Metropolitan of Lviv quietly consecrated Vasyl Velychkovsky to the episcopacy. As soon as the ceremony concluded, the authorities arrived to take Metropolitan Joseph to Rome, leaving Bishop Vasyl as the hierarch in charge of the Ukrainian Catholic Church in Ukraine. He returned quickly to Lviv, which would become the seat from which he would shepherd his flock for the next 6 years. Blessed Vasyl spoke little of his own sufferings, evident in this rare recording of a homily he gave to priests in 1965.
Він собі пригадає, як мільйони мучеників, діточок малих, дівиць, молодих людей, стареньких, ішли на муки страшні, на смерть, скріпені тою жертвою великою. Вони не були священниками, часто неграмотними людьми, але зрозуміли науку Христову про самовідречення, про смерть, щоб життя мати і життя другим дати.
The Soviets arrested Bishop Vasyl for the third and final time in 1969. They charged him with writing a booklet about our Mother of Perpetual Help and sentenced him to 3 years in prison in the Ukrainian city of Kommunarsk, where he was again tortured physically, chemically, and psychologically.
Common practice in Soviet jails, to apply electrical current to the feet, to the bottom of the feet, to toes, to sex organs, to head, to everything, yes. When the prisoners were receiving experimental medication to suppress their memories, brain functions, and also other functions in the body. And I also mentioned that this is against Nuremberg recommendations that experimental medication of this sort should be never used on prisoners. This is the reason why Eichmann was executed, because he was doing this in Auschwitz.
But even in the confines of his torturous prison, someone had the courage to show the bishop mercy.
But when comes woman, always put the injection in the mattress. And when was man, always put to his hand, And then once I just asked the nurse, she was always polite to him and nice to him, one of them. And he says, those injection is to kill me, right? And she looks like that.
So she was probably an unusual individual and more devoted than the remaining of them, and she knew the contents of the substance that she was injecting, and she did this for him,
Through it all, Bishop Vasyl remained silent as his tormentors demanded to know church secrets. When he refused to sign the papers presented to him by his communist jailers, the torture grew more severe. Now suffering from a nearly fatal illness, Bishop Vasyl narrowly survived his 3 years in Kommunarsk. In January of 1972, Vasyl Velychkovsky emerged from prison a shattered man.
Administration of various drugs and chemical agents at that time, which was a practice in Soviet Union, which had a negative impact or destructive impact on his brain structure and brain functions.
His faith in Jesus Christ and the Virgin Mary, however, was actually strengthened by the ordeal. Bishop Vasyl's experience in prison left him extremely ill, nearly on the verge of death. This was the only reason the communists released him. They didn't want the death of a man so well loved on their hands.
They let him go. They didn't want him to die in Russia, that they murdered him, They let him go out, Since KGB is smart in that way,
Upon his release, Bishop Vasyl first paid a visit to his sister in Yugoslavia before continuing on to Rome.
At that time, he also had an audience with Pope Paul VI, and he advised him or explained to him as to what happened to him himself in prison.
He learned that the Ukrainian authorities had exiled him, leaving him without a homeland.
Archbishop Metropolitan Maxim Hermaniuk invited him to come to Winnipeg, and he came to Winnipeg in June of 1972.
His arrival generated such a buzz among the large Ukrainian population that it received national media attention.
When he came in, that was press all over, on television, on news, that the bishop from Ukrainian is arriving, you know. It was almost whole Canada was talking about that, you know.
Well, this was really special because his father was a priest of the protection of the Blessed Virgin Mary Church in Shuparka of the Borsky region of Ukraine for 27 years. And my father was born in Ukraine and was raised in Ukraine in Shuparka and then came to Canada. And so really, we are kind of a family, some relation, from the same village of Shuparka.
In Winnipeg, Bishop Vasyl's firm, unwavering faith provided a sharp contrast to his frail body and shattered health.
The chest X-ray taken on February 7, 1973 revealed enlarged heart, the same way as clinical examination. X-ray of the skull or of the head, done on the same date also, showed calcification of intracranial vessels or deposits of calcium within the intracranial vessels in the skull and primarily on the base of the skull, on the base of the head.
You know, when he was walking, I don't know how he walked, because they were so stiff from those injections that they were putting in him, you know.
The psychological scars Bishop Vasyl carried from years of torture were evident in Winnipeg when others tried to get him the medical attention he needed.
When my husband come out and he says, I have to take him to the hospital. And he's in bad condition. And Bishop says, do it everything home, because he's afraid of the hospitals, because he was three years in that hospital that they were giving him injection, you know.
Well, I was afraid because the communists may be watching and maybe again some tortures would come and follow him.
Nobody could believe what KGB can do, you know. That's just a terrible thing, you know.
By all accounts, he was a quiet man and always suspicious that he was still being followed. But when he spoke of his faith, Bishop Vasyl came alive with an energy that overshadowed the ravages of his past.
And when he stood up and began to speak, his whole demeanor changed. It's like the color of this person changed completely. And then he became to be not a withdrawn person, but a person who smiled, he was radiant, he was happy. And his whole demeanor changed, as I said. And that really struck me.
His presence affected everyone around him.
A person that seemed to be just exuding this kindness and almost as though he was surrounded by light.
In the spring of 1973, less than a year after arriving in Winnipeg, Bishop Vasyl's health took a tragic turn. The toll of all his physical trials finally caught up with him.
His personal history and his imprisonment have a significant impact on his medical history.
Early that summer, Bishop Vasyl fell fatally ill and was rushed to the hospital. His body expired, his soul was freed to attain its heavenly reward. Doctors attribute his death to drugs he received in prison and the calcium deposits built up in his system after years of torture. On June 30th, 1973, Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky died and was buried among the faithful in Winnipeg's All Saints Cemetery. There his body lay in rest for nearly 30 years, forgotten by most of the world, but revered by those whose lives he touched. Then, on June 27, 2001, Pope John Paul II beatified 27 martyrs of the Ukrainian Catholic Church on his pastoral visit to Ukraine. Among the new blesseds was Vasyl Velychkovsky.
I don't know if he in his own mind had that plan. Of course he doesn't have this plan. The plan of becoming a martyr, becoming one who would give his life for Christ. But certainly that was true for him, that he was a chosen one to suffer for Christ.
I never even dreamt that we will have a shrine for the martyr from Ukraine. So this was such a great surprise that really tears came to my eyes to realize that our church is really blessed.
In September of 2002, Blessed Vasyl's body was exhumed and taken to St. Boniface Catholic Hospital. His remains were examined and prepared for enshrinement according to Vatican protocol. They placed his fully vested body into a stainless steel coffin, which was then sealed and stamped with an ecclesiastical seal. The Ukrainian Catholic Cathedral of Saints Volodymyr and Olha held a 3-day vigil with the body, followed by a Malaban service. Thousands then took to the streets for a procession to St. Joseph's Ukrainian Catholic Church. It was a joyous day, and one that earned the attention of Canadian television networks, as the Ukrainian Catholic Church honored its first martyr in North America.
To have a saint here, a blessed here in Winnipeg, in this church, reminds all of us that we are called to holiness. We are called to the same total commitment to Christ.
Today, St. Joseph's is home to Canada's second martyr shrine, the holy resting place of Blessed Bishop and Martyr Vasyl Velychkovsky. Parishioners and pilgrims alike come here to venerate and pray before this man who suffered so terribly for his faith. His presence at St. Joseph's makes it the only martyr shrine in North America to house first-class, full-body relics. As the Provincial of Ukrainian Redemptorists in North America, Father John Cianchuk is the director of the Bishop Velychkovsky Martyr Shrine at St. Joseph's Ukrainian Catholic Church.
It has been a great privilege for the last 2.5 years to be involved with Blessed Vasyl's life, to learn deeper and deeper about his enthusiasm for God, his strength of character, his courage. The enshrinement weekend was it was an experience of Easter. That is an experience beyond words. You can't describe the sense of the presence of the divine.
Crediting the Holy Spirit more than himself, Father John has also penned an Akathist service in honor of Blessed Vasyl. The service is held every Wednesday at the shrine.
The method is, the style is actually a form. It is a form to go through one's life and to have a little paragraph and the choir singing responses. So it's a style of prayer in the Eastern Church.
There is also a museum at St. Joseph's dedicated to Blessed Vasyl, so his story may never be forgotten.
I'm employed by the Ukrainian Catholic Mission as a shrine coordinator, and my duties are to promote and to teach the public about our martyr, Blessed Vasyl. And I welcome all to come and visit our shrine, to pray to him. We have a beautiful intercessory prayer to Blessed Vasyl, and he's here to help each one of us.
Amazingly, Blessed Vasyl's courageous influence continues even today.
a revival of understanding the presence of saints, having heroes in that community whom the church recognizes as having made it.
Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky was a holy man, a man unafraid to remain steadfast in his faith, even in the midst of intolerable persecution. Whether he was caught in the crossfire of war, sitting on death row, enduring unbearable torture, laboring under brutal conditions, or living with the physical and psychological effects of the aforementioned, Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky remained a true disciple of God. Blessed Vasyl's words echo in our hearts even today.
Ось, просимо пречисту, непорочну Діву Марію, Матінку Божу, щоб вона нам завжди не давала нам, а ми приймали від неї силу духа жертви, щоб з духом жертви все поборювати, все здобувати, і для Христа жити, і Христа всім давати.
In Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, at St. Joseph's Ukrainian Catholic Church, an Akathist service is held in his honor every week. The shrine and museum are open to pilgrims from around the world, not only to keep Blessed Vasyl's memory alive, but for the faithful to continue to venerate his body and pray for his intercession, in hope that he will soon be canonized a saint.
You know, perhaps his name, Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky, is hard to say at first, but his presence is very real, and he does bring forth love from our hearts, and he is one who does help us on that road to holiness.